Check. Here we are with our amateur video podcasting or whatever it is we're doing on Zoom. Scott Eustis, Community Science Director, 27th February. It is way late, but I wanted to give a preview recording video of the slide presentation for Cartoscope. This is adapted from what was made for November 5th, but this is more than that. Why are we doing aerial photo review through Cartoscope and other means? Without observation, there is no restoration. We are a captured coast politically. Oil and gas drives the legal system. It drives the scientific institutions. It drives our cultural institutions. And we are struggling to find the truth, because the truth will set us free, but it also pay us, really. I mean, come on. We want our land back. We want our ocean back. And we can get it as long as we are dogged with the truth. We pursue the truth like a dog after a bone. So at Healthy Gulf, we are watchdogs for clean water because it pays. Crime does not. This is us. I wish I could say I was here. This was April 25th, 2010, over the Deepwater Horizon site in Mississippi Canyon 252. Healthy Gulf had chartered a flight before the disaster was a thing to promote some of the fisheries work, saving the red snapper for everyone to eat. And it turned out to be an oil observation flight. 5 days into the disaster, this was still a story mostly about the 11 men, the 11 workers from across the Gulf Coast who were incinerated. And the media was not paying much attention onto the environmental impacts. The Coast Guard said there were 40 boats out in response. There were not. There's a small plane in the middle of the photo, maybe another small boat in the middle distance to the left, some kind of rig up in the center middle, and two boats, which I believe were at the source, the Macondo source. People were still searching for the men at this point, and we were on scene to fact check the Coast Guard, which said that there were an immense amount of response vessels on the site. This was the beginning of independent review of the BP disaster, which you recall, the flow rate was in question, and that flow rate is always going to be in question because that determines the fines, and the fines determine the ecological restoration. Here's a chart from Dr. Ian McDonald, who made this for a Sea Grant presentation in Excel, just a quick cartoon, and I threw up South Wings and Healthy Gulf on there. We were there April 25th, 5 days after, just saying, hey, thousands. It stretches across the horizon, y'all. Whereas Unified Command was very slow to come up to our level, maybe a couple of weeks, and even longer until the Unified Command estimates finally exceeded the so-called worst case values of, over 63,000 barrels a day. But independent observers were telling everyone that there was more to the BP spill long before we even got the video down whole, which was, it was our agitation along with, critically, Dr. McDonald and SkyTruth, who then spurred an AP investigation with different experts, forcing the government to release to the media that camera of the bottom hole and the flow rate, which enabled some of those BP worst case Chang estimates, which were funded by the AP and the independent press, which were most, but that, we will say that we were there first, just saying, we couldn't give you an estimate, but we knew it was a lot bigger than what they were saying. And we needed an independent observation to get a real value. And lo and behold, the independent observations are much closer to the truth. And the value in the end exceeded the company's worst case scenario. Without this, you don't get the Barrier Islands. This is a Barrier Island project, a huge bird habitat project. You can see the birds in the northwest corner waiting for their new home. There's a new Barrier Island in Barataria Bay. This is East Shell Island in August 2016. Built by the U.S. Department of Justice with criminal fines against BP. Here's another island, Pelican Island, planted immediately. It's habitat for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of birds. I've flown over them. This is a sexy work, right? This is us with our musician engagement with South Wings. So this is what we were doing. It wasn't me, but this is what we were doing, educating communicators and cultural producers about environmental struggles in the Gulf of Mexico when Healthy Gulf was flying over the BP Macondo source and was able to fact check the US government. This is the sufferers, and on this day we actually found an oil leak. Those guys Instagrammed the Bobco oil spill down at Blackman's Parish, and we reported it to the Coast Guard and got it cleaned up. There's a lot of work to be done, and here's an example with Taylor. Taylor Energy is suing the Coast Guard to prevent the oil cleanup on the basis that the oil spill cleanup is making surface sheens worse, but this is just impossible based on our observations. And nowadays in 2020, we can go to satellite observations where they have there's a part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that provides satellite photos of different oil spills. So you can fact check what Taylor's saying, hey, Taylor is saying, hey, it's worse in 2020 than it was in 2019, but then you can go just fact check them using satellite imagery. The press is not going to do this, right? The scientific institutions aren't going to do this. Even the government is not going to do this. It's left up to advocacy groups like ours to just go through the government data, make a map, showing that the company is misrepresenting the situation at best. The sheen in 2019 at the top is much further extent, much larger, much bigger, thick sheens or recoverable oil sheens than in 2020. So we know this. So a lot of this work is not as sexy as the airplane. But, you know, with a lot of people working on laptops with antenna, we've been able to engage artists about Hellas oil's impact to the climate and to oysters on the east bank of the river. You know, with 12 people on laptops, we were able to teach people how to review wetland permits, review the discussions of the agencies when they're going to deny a permit for Hellas to drill or to move pipelines around because they impact oysters too much. You know, and educating these communicators, these cultural professionals, these people that produce our culture in the realities of, you know, what the oil industry does to our coast. Yeah, and here's more on Taylor, just some stats. But the non-sexy work, sitting at a laptop, looking at a screen like we do with cartoscope, can really show the lies that oil companies insist and persist in telling. You know, comparing the extent of the sheen from 2019 to 2020, the average was much lower, a fifth, and the volumes are about the same. Occurrence days out of 14, not 18. I gotta change the slide. But basically, there's one more day of sheen in 2020 because they were cleaning up the spill. This is kind of a known problem. Um, but we've got one thick oil day versus 3, and we've got 4 days out of 24 with a big, huge sheen above 30 square kilometers. We just don't see those big, huge sheens anymore now that the U.S. Coast Guard is responding. Even when, as in February 2020, Cuvion is adjusting the skirt, adjusting the containment, and stuff shakes out. There is oil that does escape to the surface. So I would put, here's a similar, after McDonald, our independent observations, we still need them. For BP, it was 9 months. For us, it's been going on 16 years. Where Taylor, and this dot on the left is incorrect. They did say, hey, there's some oil coming out in the very beginning in 2004, but they very quickly to say act of God, and therefore they weren't reporting anything until MMS complained in 2008 and said the company was underreporting. The company maintains that it was a gallon, of oil a day. It was a minimal spill. It wasn't until 2010 and 2011 that nonprofits started getting engaged. And here we are with SkyTruth saying, it's at least hundreds of gallons. These are just a couple of sample observations. We've made many over the years. I just included one of when we started to say, we don't know the exact number, but it's much more, an order of magnitude more, because this is a logarithmic scale, an order of magnitude more than what you're claiming, or a few orders of magnitude more at that time. There was some litigation brought, and there was more data. There was a cost-benefit analysis done on the basis that a worst-case scenario was 3 barrels a day, or about 126 gallons a day. Taylor still does not report that many gallons are flowing from their site per day. Some of the SkyTruth estimates with some of these 50-mile long sheens, which I'm sure if we did SkyTruth estimates on the initial reports that were, 50 feet, 75 feet way back in the old aerial photo data, or if we looked at every report from the Pineda Garcia, this is actually the lower bound from Dr. Pineda Garcia's report. We see that there's 3 orders of magnitude difference between what independent reporting is talking about in terms of oil release and what the company is claiming. Flash forward to 2019, we actually have reports, and this is McDonald's report of roughly 1,100 gallons a day. I think the data for that was collected more in 2016, at least an order of magnitude above what the company is claiming. This is based on McDonald's bubbleometer as well as radar down at the bottom of the ocean. So independent science really giving a different take on what Unified Command was saying. And then, by this time we have Cuvion, who's on the site, taking the oil up and actually selling it to a third party. So there are receipts. Cuvion is actually selling about 1,000 gallons a day that they get off of a capture point at the Taylor site. So, they're literally taking it to the bank. And bless them, they're cleaning the ocean of Taylor's oil. But Taylor's still claiming that there's not that much oil coming out of the leak site, even as Cuvion is selling an order of magnitude of oil. So this part is way too long. The point is, you really can't trust the company estimates. You really can't trust even the universities, what they're doing. So we know there's no coastal restoration without citizen science like the Cartoscope project. And if you look back to BP, 65,000 barrels a day versus the 6,000 that were reported, you know, just as an order of magnitude. Imagine how that would have affected the fines. It would have affected it more than an order of magnitude, because the lying resulted in a criminal finding, which boosted the fines. At $7.2 billion, that's just Louisiana natural resources alone. So, I mean, if the estimate had stayed official at the 6,000 barrels, those barrier, you know, the money would have only been hundreds of millions. And those barrier islands might have been the only restoration project in the Gulf of Mexico, because they cost about 600 million so far. So it's just a completely different game without independent verification going against what the government's saying. So there's more citizens pay attention, there's more research, which leads to more funding. And it's up to us here at Cartoscope at Healthy Gulf to begin research questions. We are under just a terrible burden, a cultural burden of disinterest, conflicts of interest. Like, even if people wanted to study something, you know, I've had LSU professors tell me that they can't study things. They can't, the climate law program cannot study the impact of climate change on the Louisiana marshes because of LSU's funding structure. You will be run out of the university if you try to ask such research questions. And then there's just disinformation. We have a lot of disinformation coming out of the PR firms, the oil industry, and unfortunately our elected representatives. But there's a lot we can do. And look, we can take that 720 million and make it 7.2 billion. We have done it with very simple research questions. And that's the power of us on the Gulf of Mexico. Our actions for the truth really cascade into tremendous results. So join us at the Cartoscope Project. So, you know, we want to look at aerial photographs of how climate change is affecting Louisiana's marshes. And we all have Google Earth, Google Maps, which is different from 1990 when USGS first started doing these kind of character profiles of what different wetland processes, different wetland loss processes look like on a map. They kind of took dramatic examples of shapes that the marshes were in. The literal shapes affect your interpretation of a geomorphological process. So, you know, we know what shipping industry impacts look like because we know where the shipping canals are because we've spent billions of dollars making them, right? And then we know that erosion has a certain scooping or sharpening pattern to the marshes. And so the shipping channel erosion looks a certain way. There's a certain pattern that the photograph reveals. There's old agricultural impacts from when we were ditching and draining Louisiana marshes to try to grow indigo or ranch cattle. And those you wanted to turn Louisiana into Kansas. So it's always some squares, and it's always, you need tremendous amounts of drainage to drain the marshes to produce arable soils. So you always have some kind of regular drainage line that's often in that rectangular squarish pattern. Coastal erosion, just like the shipping erosion, but different, kind of a big scoop, a convex shape, but not as intense as the shipping erosion, which looks more like a serrated knife, you know, versus a scimitar. But it's the still exterior outside-in pattern that creates points and scoops, and there's pointiness to the pattern. Also, it's an exterior phenomenon. So if you're taking a photograph of the shoreline where you're having this phenomenon, you're going to get a lot of water in the photograph. So if there's a lot of water and you have a big scoop, a big long scoop, like kind of a stretched out convex shape and a lot of water, that's coastal erosion. And then oil and gas canals and pipelines, as well as oil and gas canal and pipeline related submergence and subsidence. There's a disintegration pattern, but also just like with the shipping canal, we can see the oil canal there, right? So we know that that is the canal that caused the submergence. It's the canal that either impounded the wetlands or polluted the wetlands, or the canal enabled the drilling that, you know, sucked the fluid from underneath the wetlands and caused it to sink. But these submergence and subsidence patterns are an inside out pattern. They're not an outside in erosive pattern. And they're not a square pattern like you would get with an ag impact. So it's more of a disintegration. And so climate change is going to look like this number 4, except there are no canals related to it because it's a flooding problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. This is just like, this is from the USGS publication that Dr. Penland and Jeffress Williams worked on. The big bluish, dark purple is the shipping canal, and then the erosion associated with the shipping canal is that light purple, and then the medium purple is the coastal erosion. So you can see what I'm saying is that it creates pointiness, erosion does. The shipping canal is kind of like a serrated knife. The coastal erosion is more of a sweeping but convex shape. It creates these points in the erosive pattern. And then you also have a little bit of smattering of, those are the outside in patterns. The inside out is oil and gas related, but then also something called natural waterlogging, or what they called natural waterlogging in 1990. I think we have a different opinion today. But the point of this slide is that's the Mr. Go, big shipping channel impact, and we've got a sharper erosion pattern, the serrated knife, not the scoops of the coastal. And here's what the photograph looks like. We've got this north, west, southeast channel. We have the sharps. It looks like a serrated knife eroding coastal marshes away, turning them into water. Agriculture, well, one, it's rare. There's not a lot of this kind of pattern. Most is inside out. Like here's some multiple cause disintegration pattern. You can see how it's just kind of speckled. I don't know if there's a better term. Here's some waterlogging that they didn't associate with oil and gas. Again, it's like an interior, it starts ponding and creating little ponds on the inside. Here's ponding associated with the oil and gas canals here. So, you know, this is actually is a good photograph. And there's coastal erosion, right? It's at the edges of the large bodies of water, and it creates these pointiness, those points. So that's outside in. Here's inside out, oil and gas, inside out, multiple causes, including oil and gas, inside out, including waterlogging. But ag, there's a square feature, and this is actually an old ag feature as well. And you can look at the photo and you can see these drainage dishes that were used to create arable farmland, which now, of course, is just submerged underneath the waves. This is still, well, anyway, look at that seagrass. Anyways, here's coastal erosion, an extreme example of northern Barataria Bay. So many points, you know, so many convex shapes, and a lot of water. The white is water, the green is land. I should have mentioned that before. In the US, all of these USGS, you know, this is the water, and this is the green is the land, and these are the difference between 1932 and 1990 in the aerial photos. Yeah, here's the water, right, of Lake Bourne here. So white is the water, green is the land, and the purple is the difference between 1932 and 1990. And you see that the erosive, which is in the dark purple, just like it's the dark purple here and dark purple here. That's coastal erosion. It's about a quarter of the land loss from Louisiana. So it's not insignificant, it's just overblown. And if you're the oil industry, you want this natural process to account for 100% of the land loss, right? Oh, look at Mother Nature just destroying everything. Isn't it a shame? So this is, if you go to any of the museums or cultural institutions, they talk about coastal erosion. Coastal erosion is only a quarter of the problem. But this is the pattern. It's erosion sharpens the marsh, right? So it makes pointiness. It's lost from the outside in. And another characteristic is that you're going to have these huge bays. There's lots of water and often more water than land. And here's a close-up, really close-up on this feature in Bay Jimmy, where this used to have land that made it a contiguous marsh, and as it eroded away, and these two bays connected, creating these points. So erosion creates pointiness. Look, most of the problem is the oil industry. They destroyed the Louisiana marshes, and they knew it. And they estimated around 1980 that it would cost $34.7 billion. Most of that is Chevron and Texaco at the time, Shell, Exxon, and a lot of other companies, including Freeport-McMoRan, who's settling. And they're finally paying out in 2020. And here's a memo. The oil worker sends a note to the boss. Hey, this pit is terrible. And the boss is like, don't worry about it. And within the coastal division, superintendents are saying, hey, we're getting these regulations that we have to fix the coast, but these regulations could be mitigated through congressional action to reduce their economic impacts. We're not going to spend money fixing the problem. We're going to spend money lobbying Congress, and they have succeeded. But science is there. we're pricier than lobbyists, but if you want the truth, you can hire scientists. So we've documented the oil industry related submergence, and again, it's this disintegration pattern, inside out, not outside in, in association with the smaller canals, not the shipping canals, the smaller canals of oil and gas. So we can look at a couple of different patterns in West Bank Plaquemines Parish. This is Upper Barataria, around the town of Barataria. We have a tremendous amount of, you see there's erosion in the larger land features, but then there's disintegration related to oil and gas around, not all, but most of these oil field plays. So, at the higher elevation, closer up to New Orleans, you get kind of a start of the ponding. This is a place where backfilling, you could restore these marshes. You could restore the hydrology amazingly cheaply. There's a large potential for cheap restoration, but these wells, even this well here, which may have never produced a drop of oil, Chevron and other companies are fighting, they don't want to backfill the canals. Even though you push these tallow banks back in, you get a more even flow, these ponds start to disappear. So there's a tremendous regenerative capacity of the marshes if you just alleviate these dam features. It really is, and when I say dam, this is 3 feet of material. This is incredibly small amounts of material to move. It's just death by 1,000 cuts. It's procedurally difficult because there's so many different landowners and mobilization costs. It's tedious work, so the state has not wanted to deal with it to date. So you can start to look at here's what it looks like from an airplane, looking at the river, looking south from Crown Point. Here's what it looks like in the aerial photo, where we have the canals, and you can see we have a natural water feature, a bayou that the canals fed off of at some point. But then you have the ponding, not in the small canal footprint, but you know, you get this disintegration from the middle of the marsh. Here's these little dots. It's the back marsh, which is, if you're a student of salt marshes, you know the back marsh is the lowest elevation. So as impoundment happens, as drainage blockages happen, the marsh is drowned and the plants cannot hold the root mat together, and you start to get lakes. And so this is that lake formation in a relatively freshwater marsh here, a rooted emergent, not a flotant, freshwater marsh in West Bank Plaquemines. Further down you go, you don't have that dynamic freshwater system. You get more of an intermediate or brackish system, and maybe you've got a lot more pollution. Here's the Lafitte oil field, Chevron Texaco. It's annihilated. It's disintegrated where there's nothing but the little dams, the little spoil banks are left over. And this is really where 90% of the coastal restoration money is focused. It's called dredged marsh creation. You're dredging sediments from the river or from a local bay, and rebuilding these oil fields. There could be saltwater, brine, pollution, radioactive T-norm from the oil drilling in the bottom of these bays. That saltwater brine killed everything. The impoundments of those canals, oil banks, killed everything. And then there was induced submergence in some oil fields where the fluid extraction was rapid. It's been documented in a few cases. But this is oil and gas related submergence. And there's, you know, a couple of different mechanisms, but what is the characterization? It's the disintegrated land associated with these little canals. And here it is. This is kind of the end game of, you know, we looked at the beginning of the process, upriver a bit, and then the more downriver we go. Here's an example of like kind of the end of the process. We don't even have seagrass out in the middle of the old oil field. You can see there is it's like a almost fully disintegrated, but there is that disintegration pattern present. Okay, and then there's combinations. Yeah, nothing is simple. Here's Bayou-Rigolets. So on the inside of this land feature, you have your little oil canal in your pipeline canal, causing impoundments, causing the disintegration pattern. And then in the larger bayou, you've got your scooped points. And you notice the watercolor is very different. You've got a lot more water flow in this body of water than this pond, interior pond. And then even the color of the marsh is different in this winter photograph. So this is a mixed, you've got oil and gas related submergence in the middle. You've got direct removal from oil and gas from the canal and pipeline canal. And then you've got erosion just on the other side of the bank. And that's what USGS reflects, this disintegration pattern in the middle, the actual canal footprint, of course, direct removal, and then the erosive effect of just that Bayou-Rigolets going from a meandering lake, really interesting, weird feature, right? What kind of elevation change produces that thing? Into something that's just this big, it's pretty much a lake. It's not nearly as interesting now because we've lost so much. But what about sea level rise? You know, submergence is a big part, and surface impacts are a large part of that submergence in Cameron Parish, as well as in the oil fields in the east. We also get subsurface submergence from extraction. But always the myth has been, oh, well, Louisiana is new land, it's consolidating. And so, you know, it's subsidence. It's not sea level rise. This is the currency in Baton Rouge. There's denial about climate change. And so the master plan can only pass with the approval of the oil executives in our legislature. So this is how they can't talk, they can't say climate change, but they can say sea level rise. And then even sea level rise is a bit too political. They want to cut it with subsidence and make a, you know, the spoonful of medicine with the sugar coating. But here, when this slide came out in 2016, looks like a boring slide. Let me tell you, that room full of Baton Rouge people they were angry, confused, and scared when this slide came out, showing that, you know, the myth that it's all subsidence. It holds true in the Birdfoot. It holds true in the lower end of Plaquemines, where we have the newest land in Louisiana. There's still a lot of consolidation happening, but everywhere else, no. It's really the sea level that's going to cause the inundation of the marshes. So it's really more of there's two little graphics down there. There's the graphic on the left, graphic on the right. You know, are we sinking, or is the water coming to drown us, right? Is it sea level rise or subsidence? And really, the water is drowning our marshes. And this is the major cause into 2067 of land loss. And this is just the next 20 years. So this is even before you get a lot of the accelerated sea level rise that we're going to see. And notice where the red is. That's the land that we're going to lose in the next 20 years. Yeah, I want to look at a land feature like this one by Bay Saint Bois, which is where the Grand Bayou people live. Or it's where they harvest oysters, and they live harvesting oysters there. You know, these features are very vulnerable in the next 20 years, but they're not really associated with existing canals or any infrastructure. In 1990, there started to be a disintegration pattern. And in 1990, you know, that pond had been there since 1932. But all these little flecks of ponds start to emerge. And because it wasn't associated with an oil and gas canal feature, in 1990 and into 2000, USGS just said, well, this is natural water logging. I think I don't have that map produced yet, shoot. Anyway, where you have disintegration from inside out with no canal features, or other human features like a road or a shipping canal. This often was where USGS, based on the 1990 photo, said this is natural water logging. Well, what is water logging but the water drowning the marshes? So really, in 2020, to me, this is sea level rise. It's the regional pattern that the water is now higher than it was in 1990. And this is the map that I made, and I didn't put on the slides yet, showing you that this red map, there's a lot of overlay with the places that in 1990 and 2000 they thought were natural water logging. That I'm saying these are the marshes that are going to be drowned by sea level rise. So what does that look like in a photo? The disintegration with no canals or other human features like roads. So as we're reviewing our aerial photographs, this is the task before us. We need to count. We need to account for this. No one wants to do it. Certainly not USGS. No one wants to be fired. LSU can't talk about it, or they'll be fired. You know, you're up against some of the richest people in the world with armies and armies of lawyers who nowadays will probably go after you for defamation or something. You know, if you start to claim that this regional disintegration pattern, this regional waterlogging pattern, it's not associated with any human features, it's not associated with a road, a former mine site, a fishing site, it's not associated with oil and gas extraction, but it's a broad regional pattern in Lower Plaquemines Parish and Lower Lafourche Parish. What's drowning the marshes here? Well, gee willikers, Bobby. This is what I'm saying. By process of elimination, this is the climate change impact to the marsh footprint. And we at Healthy Gulf need the Cartoscope project and your participation to document this in acres, because all these little things, just like the oil canals, are too small for the government to count. But we can count it. We have the time. We've got nothing but time. And this kind of question, once we do it, we can shame the government and LSU into doing this analysis for real. Yeah, so here, this is the spot in Lower Plaquemines Parish. There's no real name for these features because they're emergent water features with no coherence. This is not a place where people travel by boats, and yet it's disintegrating, and there's just no, in the literature, no discussed cause. So I'm naming that cause, and that's sea level rise caused by climate change. Here's what it looks like on aerial, Google Maps. I would even say if there were a random canal through these marshes, you might even say that this disintegration pattern is not associated with that feature. It's systematic. It's kind of throughout the photograph. So, you might consider, this is the challenge of Cartoscope, and the power of Cartoscope is it gives us the power to produce many evaluations with many eyes to see how people would deal with some of the ambiguities that are out there. This shot, however, I'm saying is unambiguously sea level rise, climate change induced marsh loss, lots of little ponds, lots of little disintegrations, until the water level rises so much that our interior marsh starts to become one big pond. Here's another photo. This is a bayou. You can see it's a natural feature because it's curved. There are no man-made canals, and yet we get this hair plug marsh, this disintegrating marsh. It's not a coherent marsh platform. This is what it looks like when climate change destroys your coastal marshes. So with that, let's work on a cartoscope that can deliver an assessment of where on the coast and where in West Plaquemines and Jefferson these marshes are disappearing. And with that assessment, we can get an acreage measurement and use it in our advocacy against the change in climate and against fossil fuel pollution. So what do you say? That's me. We're Healthy Golf. I am Scott Eustis, Scott at healthygolf.org, 504-525-1528, extension 212. Like, share, and subscribe. And remember to donate, because that's how we're funded. That's what keeps me up at 9 o'clock in the dark recording a video, is your $30 donation. So yeah, stay real.